We're building something big here at Local Laundry. It started with just $50 and now we're a 7-figure business, but we want to get so much bigger. I'll show you what we've been up to. I started Local Laundry back in 2015, all with $50 and a simple Google search, how to make a t-shirt company. I then watched a YouTube video. It told me how to set up a Shopify store, and then that video showed me how to connect a Shopify store to Printful, to print on demand. And $50 later, a couple of designs, I had an online t-shirt company. My first orders were just a bunch of friends and family. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I had something when we had clothing that was all about building community and bringing people together, and I wanted to grow it. I just didn't know how. Back then I was doing everything by myself. I was living abroad in Sweden at the time. I was just doing this on the side. I didn't know the first thing about anything. I didn't know the first thing about e-commerce, design, how to build a brand. Did everything I could. I worked in the evenings and weekends and every resource I had. I was living in Sweden. Orders were getting printed in LA and shipped to Calgary. I had a vision that I knew that clothing could really build a community, can bring people together. How we choose to dress ourselves, what we put on ourselves is a showcase of what we believe in. It's a showcase of our values. And those values can connect us with other people. And I thought that there was something there that could connect us with other people. And so I just kept exploring that more and more and more. Let me show you some of our earlier designs. I honestly never thought we'd have a warehouse this big. We were operating my parents' basement for the first little bit. And then after that, we were operating out of my basement and then my garage. And eventually we got into our own warehouse. Welcome to the Local Laundry Archive. This is where we keep some of our samples, but also some of our earlier designs. When we first started, I wanted it to be about different Calgary communities. So I wanted to be a different design designed by an artist from every community for every community in Calgary. I came up with the first ones. That's why they're not the greatest. And we had a design for almost every single community in Calgary. Airdrie, Bankview, you name it. The original designs I did, because I'm no designer, and I needed to figure out how to design. This was before the days of Canva. I didn't know how to use PowerPoint. I used a website called Hipster Logo Generator. And yeah, it's still around and it's still embarrassing. So we started out by just having drop shipping, and then we eventually moved to printing in bulk and inventory because stores wanted to carry us. And I'll never forget the first time a store reached out and said, hey, we'd love to buy some of your clothing. And I was so scared and intimidated because I didn't know how that worked. So we showed up to our first meeting, had all our pieces of paper, prepared to go through a contract and all this, and had a briefcase and everything. And we met this person from some boutique shop, and we said, how does this work? How do we negotiate, good sir? I just said, well, it's really easy. You give us clothing and we give you money. It's as easy as that. Eventually it got to the point where more and more stores wanted to carry us, and that was great, but they kept pushing us to make a garment for cheaper and cheaper. And at this time, we're getting our clothing made all over. They weren't made in Canada, they were made in Mexico, China, Bangladesh, and customers kept asking us, you're called Local Laundry, why isn't your clothes made locally? And we didn't have a really good answer. We had all this pressure coming from retail stores to make our garment for cheaper and cheaper. We knew we're not a big box store. We don't have these massive orders. We can't compete with these guys on price, because no matter how cheap we get it, we're never gonna be able to get it as cheap as these big guys with big buying power. So we said, how do we do something different that they can't compete with us? And we said, let's compete on values. No one was making stuff here in Canada. No one was making clothes. Fun fact that we found out was that prior to 1989, according to Stats Canada, over 70% of all clothing bought and sold in Canada was made in Canada. 70%. That number is less than 5% as of 2020. And we kind of saw that and we thought, you know what, this might be a good opportunity to do something different, differentiate ourselves, create a premium brand that tells a story, that showcases our values. And that's when we switched to Canadian made, something that we had to stand out and be different than everyone else. And all of a sudden we weren't playing the price game. Our sweaters went from $60 overnight to $80. Now they're at $100. So what it did was we were able to start telling a story, and we were able to differentiate ourselves from just any other clothing company you see at the mall. I met my business partner. We still weren't full-time. We were working on this part-time. We still had these 9-to-5 jobs. In the evenings and weekends, We packed orders, filmed social content, that kind of thing. Finally in 2017, I was able to quit my job. The business, every dollar we made went right back into building the business. And I got to the point where I could finally pay myself a salary, and I was able to quit my full-time job and do this full-time. The strategy at the time was get into more and more retail stores. Retail stores would pop these big orders. They'd place these massive orders, and it was great. We kept going into stores, more stores. At one point we were in 25 stores across Canada, and that was great. And then the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, it really put us in a difficult position because all these retail stores just closed right away. We were forced to come up with a different way. How do we make money? How do we continue? How do we continue the revenue? How do we continue growing? Because these retail stores stopped carrying us. And that's when we started approaching businesses. We started approaching different companies and say, hey, who does your merch? Who does your swag? Who does your clothing? Can we start making your clothing? Can we start making clothing that people actually want to wear, that's Canadian made, that's supporting local, that tells a story rather than just putting a logo on something? That's how we kind of grew the business. We never took any investors, no long-term debt. The money that we got from these custom orders went right back into building the business. And eventually we were able to hire a couple of people. We were able to bring my business partner on full-time. All these little things, step by step, moving forward one thing at a time. It hasn't all been smooth sailing. Obviously, every business has its issues. I like to think that every business is just a series of problems waiting to be solved. For every business problem, there's a massively big opportunity to solve them and find the solution. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned through all this is problems are gonna happen in business. They're gonna come, they're gonna go. It's how you decide to react to them. You can focus on solution and not the problem. Let's make lemonade, right? Stop focusing on the lemons and let's make lemonade. Stop focusing on who's to blame, how this happened, blah, 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 and how are we gonna fix this? How are we gonna make this right? What are we gonna do for the customer? We're on the mission to donate $1 million to local charities by 2030. We want to showcase that just because we're a small business doesn't mean we can't have a big impact. We might not be writing $1 million checks today or tomorrow, but if we write a $100 check today, maybe a $1,000 check next year, over time, we're gonna hit that goal of $1 million. And we're gonna showcase that just because you're a small business doesn't mean you can't have a big impact. For example, when the wildfires hit Jasper, we came up with a Jasper t-shirt design. We threw it up on our website and said that 100% of all profits would go to supporting the Canadian Red Cross to help those that have been impacted by the Jasper wildfire. We went to our decorators, we went to our manufacturers, said, what can you do to bring the cost down as much as we can, the most amount of money that we could. And in 5 days, we sold over 1,000 t-shirts, by simply just putting it out there, giving people an opportunity, an avenue to help. We just put it out there and we were absolutely blown away by the amount of people that wanted to help us. Bought a t-shirt, that supported us, that shared it out, and we sold over 1,000 t-shirts in 5 days. From those 1,000 shirts, we were able to raise $25,000 for the Canadian Red Cross. Now that was matched by the provincial government and then it was matched again by the federal government. So altogether, in 5 days, we'd raised over $75,000 for the Canadian Red Cross. That's why we want to hit that goal of $1 million to local charities by 2030. This is just the beginning of Local Laundry. I want to start sharing the story of telling you about the ups and downs, the key business lessons, what we've learned. We have big things coming. There's more to come. We have new products, new stories, and even bigger goals. So stay tuned, subscribe. Next week, I want to tell you about our biggest custom order that we ever got. Absolutely game-changing, life-changing. I can't wait to share it with you. My name's Connor Kern, and I'm one of the co-owners of Local Laundry.